Ed Markey, U.S. Senator of Massachusetts.
Thanks for coming. I'm delighted to have Senator Markey here. Senator Markey, I'm so glad to be talking to you today about your work promoting mental health amongst young people. That's a topic that's close to my heart. I have 2 children, and it seems like it's an increasingly challenging world to navigate with the COVID-19 pandemic, gun violence, climate change, and of course the prevalence of social media and its largely unknown effects on developing brains. So that's in fact where I want to start. I want to start with social media and with a great quote from you, which really puts into perspective its effects. You said, big tobacco damages our lungs, big oil damages our environment, big tech damages our young people. How do you think it does that, and what do we still need to know about its effects?
Well, last year in the United States, 1 in 3 teenage girls contemplated suicide. 1 in 10 teenage girls actually attempted suicide. 1 in 5 LGBTQ youth attempted suicide last year in the United States of America. So we have a mental health crisis amongst young people in our nation. During the pandemic, there was a doubling of the amount of time which young people spent online. And we can see that there's a toxic stew here that has been brewed, where young people are now absolutely living in a world of crisis in our country. Much of it is driven by, for the most part, unregulated media. So, for example, if you're a 13 or 14-year-old girl in the United States and you have bulimia or you have anorexia and you go online, your information is going to be gathered. And most likely, you'll start to get targeted with more information about bulimia, anorexia, than you actually wanted to have in the first place, only worsening your condition. What are the rights that 13 or 14-year-old girl, what does she have? She has no rights at all. She can't tell the company to stop targeting her. Her parents can't tell the companies to stop targeting her because she's just become a product of those companies. And that's why we need an online privacy bill of rights for teenagers and children in our country. The right to say that we know that information is being gathered about them. And we need notice that that information that's being gathered is going to be used for purposes other than that which was intended. And the right to say no. And we have to set the standards here in the United States, because our tech companies, they fight regulation overseas. They take the position that they invented it, they can decide what the algorithms are, and you just should stay away from it. But you can't preach temperance from a bar stool. You can't say that the United States has the highest values in the world, and then not yourself maintain them. And the youth crisis that we have in our country is a perfect example, and we need to pass the laws here so that then we can set the example for the rest of the planet in terms of the safeguard, which should be put in place to protect teens and children in our country.
So I have to ask about the CAMERA Act, which you have authored with Representative Raskin, which directs $15 million for research into how technology is reshaping the development of children. What are the questions that you want this research to answer?
Well, there's never been research done by the National Institutes of Health on the impact of social media on the young people in our country. So I want, for the first time, to have the federal government do the definitive study of what has happened to young people in the United States over the last 20 years since social media has been introduced into the lives of young people in our society. It's never been done. we need the absolute definitive word from our top healthcare specialists that would then drive what we need to do in order to protect young people from the most pernicious aspects of social media. There's a Dickensian quality to the internet. It's the best of technologies and the worst of technologies simultaneously. It can enable, it can ennoble, it can degrade, it can debase. Yes, we want to reap the benefits, but we have to begin to now eliminate the downside of the internet, because we can see the catastrophic consequences it's having on young people in our society.
And I think there's a sense globally that this is something that needs to start in the US, because the vast majority of these companies are based here. We've seen Europe take some steps towards privacy regulations. I think there's a sense of, why is it taking so long in the US to put these kinds of guardrails in place?
Well, Europe has taken strong steps, but it was fought by the US companies the whole way. That's the shame of it. And the reason that they fight it is that, like, as you said, like the tobacco industry, these industries have to target young people, get them addicted, get them going, so that they're so used to having this product, whether it be tobacco or it be social media in their lives, that they just accept it. So since the Surgeon General, for example, in 1965 issued the warning on smoking, we've gone from 50% of adults down to only 20% who smoke in the United States. And here's one other thing, which tobacco companies know, that if you haven't started smoking by the age of 19, the chances of you starting to smoke is almost zero. So they know they have to get you young.
Yeah.
And the same model has been adopted by the social media companies. They have to get you early. They have to get you addicted. They have to get you into a frame where you're using their product, even though it's having dramatic, deleterious impacts on your brain.
And this is something you've been working on for a while. You authored the landmark Children's Online Privacy Protection Act of 1998, and then before that, you put in place regulations on advertising on TV for children. Obviously, things have changed in the last 25 years since that Children's Online Protection Act. What are some of the protections or regulations, common sense safeguards that you think need to be put in place urgently?
Well, I think that we have to say, number one, that when a social media company, TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, you name it, gets information about young people, they then can't target those young people with advertisements, that is prohibited. We need an eraser button where the young person or their parent can say to the companies, erase all of that information which you have gathered about me or about my child. Just absolutely stop harming my young child in my house. So
these sound like they're going further than Europe. Do you think you can get this done?
I think that actually the hearings on TikTok have helped to make it very clear the impact which social media companies are having on young people in our country. And I will say that while many people talk about banning TikTok, what the TikTok hearings have made clear is that American companies are doing the same thing.
So does TikTok need to be banned, or is that?
No, I'm saying we need a uniform set of regulations across the board for TikTok, for Facebook, for Instagram, for all these companies, just saying, stay away from the young people in our country. Stop using your drive for profits as an excuse to harm the mental health of young people in our society. It's a crisis, just stop it. But we in Congress must pass this law. In the same way, I would say that climate reinforces mental health concerns of young people.
I do want to get to climate.
No, please.
But I do have to ask, so do you think TikTok should be banned?
I think that we have to put guardrails around all social media, all of it, all of it.
So banning TikTok not a priority for you?
The top priority is the harm being done to young people in our society right now. That's the real harm.
Right.
That is something that's a clear and present danger to the health and well-being of our nation right now, and we should pass those safeguards immediately, or else we're going to reap a whirlwind of mental health issues for these individuals for generations to come. We have a chance right now to do something, and if we don't, we're going to see people writing novels and books when they're 35 and 40 saying, what was our society thinking about when they allowed me to be exposed to all of that trash, that crap, that is generated online. So,
do you think that can be a bipartisan thing?
Yes, it is. My legislation is bipartisan. I'm doing it with Senator Bill Cassidy, a Republican, a physician from Louisiana. He understands and is very concerned about the mental health aspects of this problem as well. And by the way, we also have to increase funding for mental health, young people's mental health in our society as well. We have to do that in tandem.
Let's talk quickly about the work that you've done on funding for mental health regarding climate change and the bill that you've put forward that says that there needs to be more mental health support for people in environmental justice communities, communities that are very affected by climate change. That strikes me as a really ambitious goal. Tell me about what are the challenges that are inherent in government working to promote mental health in young people.
This is, the climate crisis is something that young people believe has been left to them to solve by the preceding 2 or 3 generations, and that they did nothing. And that they are now going to have to live with their lives and their children's lives with the consequences of the dereliction of duty which public officials in our country actually engaged in, allowing the fossil fuel industries to control the public health agenda of our nation. And if the United States doesn't lead on climate, then we can't expect the rest of the world to follow. Again, we're hypocrites if we don't act. You can't preach temperance from a bar stool. You can't expect a child to not smoke if you have a cigarette while you're telling them smoking is dangerous. You can't expect a child not to drink if you have a beer in your hand while you're telling a child that alcohol is bad for you. And you can't expect the rest of the world to listen to us if we preach temperance on climate change and we continue to pollute. Okay, so young people are smart. They can see the hypocrisy. They expect us to act, and they live then with the mental health consequences of all of the threats, all of the dangers, and at the top of the list are environmental justice communities, Black, brown, immigrant communities, which have always been the sacrificial zones in our society, in the same way, by the way, that poor countries around the world have been sacrificial zones in terms of environmental damage as well. And so young people see it. They're calling out the hypocrisy.
What inspired you to work on this? Was there a personal story here?
When I was a boy, I lived in the sacrificial ward in Malden, Massachusetts, where all the industries were along the Malden River. And when I was about 10, my mother said, Eddie, whatever you do, don't swim in the Malden River, 3 blocks from my house, where all the chemical and coal and other companies were just using the Malden River as a dumping ground. And the Malden River was black with a pre-Jimi Hendrix purple haze over it. And when your mother says, don't swim in the Malden River, you know you're not Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn on Mississippi. You're living in an environmental sacrifice zone. It didn't have that name at that time, but they exist in every city in America, and they're always in the poorest wards. Okay? And around the world, it's always the poorest countries that are the environmental sacrifice zones, okay? Young people know this, not only here, but around the world. And the United States has to be the moral and political and technological leader to solve this problem. And that's why the global conference that's coming up in this November is really going to be a challenge for our country, because the rest of the world is going to be saying to us, what are you doing? And thank God, President Biden last year signed the first major climate bill in American history, but we have so much more to do. in order to satisfy the very real concerns young people have about the kind of lives they will be leading.
Well, best of luck with that fight, and thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, and thanks for having this subject. Very much appreciate it. Thank you.